Okay, hello. Merry Christmas Eve. Today I've got something spicy planned, something that's spicy for me. And I don't know if it's going to be spicy for everybody else too. Well, we'll see where this goes. So, so I wanted to dive into some things that I keep seeing around what I think is properly called a psychosis around the conversations and fights and stances that are taken around gender identity politics. Um, so I want to give a little context about why. Um, there's there's been for me a really powerful hesitation to talk about any of these things. Um, and the rationale that goes through my mind is, I'm not really primarily about these topics. Like if I have a message, it's not at the level of an object level thing like that. The thing that I have to say is about how these conversations happen, how culture works, how people have discussions about things that are really challenging, um, and the ways in which that create the standard way that we interact about these topics creates a lot of difficulty. The net effect is that anytime there's a hot topic, something that's actively triggering for a lot of people, and that people are really inclined to take strong stances about and moralize and condemn about, anytime there's anything like that going on, I immediately want to retract from it because I get scared. The fear takes the form in me of whatever I say, I'm going to piss a lot of people off. And they might not even understand what I'm saying, but what I say might be close enough to something they hate that they can round it to that. Or they can at least recognize I'm not taking their side, which means I'm against them. This is not across the board, but like it's common enough that I can expect that. And then the kind of heat that I get will actually distort the message that I have to say, which isn't primarily about the hot topic, whatever it is. So that's the rationale that goes, maybe I'll just set that aside. I won't say anything about gender or about race or about ableism or any of these things. If I'm going to pick stances, I'm going to pick strong stances about things that aren't hot topics. I could see them being hot topics, things about immortalism or child rights. Basically, nobody has, there aren't active culture wars about anti-aging. To the extent that there's anything like anti-aging versus aging is good or anything like that, the anti-aging camp is, for the most part, almost entirely crushed. The exception is a few bits of taking a little bit of medical advancements. But the point is that it's not a culture war. It's not a front of the culture war, as opposed to something like uh, like hot questions like, is there a genetic component to race? Do those genes correlate with anything else if there are? If they're not, what are we talking about? Like those are really hot topic conversations right now. Right? So looking at those kinds of things, I look at it and go, I have things to say. I have incredibly clear things to say. To me, a bunch of this is actually excruciatingly clear, because when you're not operating entirely within the mimetic battles, when you're not a soldier in the culture war, and you can sort of look at the battle from overhead, it's a lot easier to see, oh, they're fighting over that resource. And the soldiers believe, okay, I see the system. And seeing the system suggests an alternative. And I think that that vantage point makes a lot more sense as one to orient to what's going on. Unfortunately, if named too clearly about active battles, both sides like to aim their archers at the person speaking from a different vantage point, because it might reduce the morale of the soldiers. It's not that reasoned through, but there's a problem much like that. So because of that, I feel a lot of fear and I keep quiet. It has become clear to me that that tendency in me, that quieting tendency, is itself a place where I abandon my power and my clarity, where I'm manipulable. Yesterday I was going into, with somebody pointing out, manipulation has this very negative connotation, and I mean it when I just said it there. I'm manipulable, like I have a flaw. Yeah, and that's definitely an active edge for me there. Um, but there's something real I'm looking at there, having to do with if I want to encourage the kind of world that would fill me with joy, like that world includes a world where everyone around me is happy. Like I would love to see that. And I would love it not to just be because I am filtering out the people who are unhappy. I want flourishing everywhere. This gets complicated when you look at cases of, well, what about people whose flourishing is about keeping other people from flourishing? That gets really messy. I don't claim to have all the answers to that. I have some, but not all of them. But in terms of participating in the creation of that kind of world, a world that is actually good for everyone, it is a disservice for me to let fear of what others might say, think, or do be the reason that I do not speak against madness. There are strategic questions to account for, but that's different from letting a fear possess me. So, in the spirit of that, I intend to bring some forward in order to bring my innards in touch, my energetic innards in touch with reality. Now, I want to be really concrete about what the fear is, because the fear is actually a reaction to exactly the mechanism that I want to point at. There's this trend that shows up in a lot of modern conversations, a huge number of modern conversations, particularly about social and political conversations, especially if they're anything about what anyone should do, which is like most of them. There's this enormously powerful emphasis that if someone is honest and they reveal an aspect of themselves that is considered to be on the list of bad traits, then they need to be condemned. Now, this makes, on the surface level, this makes some sense. It makes a little bit of sense, and I want to honor that. But there's something about, like if someone is, it's really hard to come up with a very practical example of this because the cases where it actually makes sense on a civilizational level are incredibly rare. But we don't see that. There's this thing of if somebody reveals an aspect of themselves, if you catch an aspect of somebody, I think that's more the thing. If you catch, if you notice that if somebody actually blurts out some kind of thing that hints at, yeah, actually that person really is racist. They just really think that blacks are lesser beings. But they're still kind of trying to hide it. You definitely want to pull that out and go, this person cannot be trusted about anything having to do with race relations. Because they're going to sneak in that racist thing in there. Right? Now, the problem with this is that we've confused the content with the process. As a civilization, there is this enormous tendency to zoom in on that person is racist, so we need to keep them from having any influence. The problem isn't that they're racist. The problem is that they are unwilling to let all of their innards dialogue with truth, which means that what they do is going to be played in power games and in a bunch of sideways bullshit that is meant to distort the picture. That's the problem. This is not a popular view, but it's true. This is one of the main reasons our entire species is dealing with all of the chaos that it is today. I mean, to amp things up, there's this recent announcement about a new strain of COVID showing up in England and possibly, I think it was South Africa. It looks like we're like if there's anything to that, which is always hard to say, but like if there's anything to that, we're in for another year of the same thing. Like we're in for another 2020. And the reason for it, the foundational reason, isn't because reality is out to get us. It's because if we keep ignoring truth and demanding that truth be something different, we can't look at it. So this gets to cases like, you look at what Biden said very early on, I think this was before the presidential primaries, if I remember right, um, when he blurted out this statement that offended so many people. I think the phrase was something like, if you don't vote for me, then you ain't black, um, speaking to the black communities. Now, the details of why that's an inappropriate thing to say, I'm not going to go into. And dissecting, well, was it inappropriate, blah, blah, blah. Like, it doesn't matter. And in a very important way, it does not matter. What matters is the nature of the response was not, oh, you've got that in you? You've got the inclination to say that in you? Okay, what's that hiding? Can you please show us where that's coming from, and so that we can sort that out in the light of day? And because until that happens, we can't trust you. We can't trust you with race relations. We can't, and we don't know what else we can't trust you with, because if you've got something that big hiding, what else are you hiding? What are you, what is the shell game you're playing with your persona? Who are you? Right? That is a clear question. That is the right question to ask. And ideally, it's done out of compassion. Compassion for Biden, compassion for Black communities, compassion for everybody. That's the ideal, says I. Like, anything that falls short of that is going to recreate worlds like this one, where we're dealing with this pandemic and all this political corruption and all of this incompetence. And even before then, we had all of these issues with climate change and climate change politics, and the threat of extinction from artificial intelligence and all kinds of crazy stuff. This is coming from the fact that the response isn't, oh, this is true. Let me understand the truth more fully. Right? That's easy to do when the truth is something that you've decided you like. It's hard and it's challenging and it matters when you encounter truths that challenge your sense of identity and reality. That's where it matters. So the reaction to Biden of, how dare you have said that? How dare you have said that? Okay. Now, you think about what kind of incentive that puts in place. Okay. This means that he is encouraged to scan what he says to make sure that he does not reveal anything that could potentially have an energy behind it that would hurt Black communities. Now, that doesn't address the energy. It is emotional post-production. It's dealing with it after it has risen and then noticing, no, 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 don't say that. Hide that, shift that around, avoid letting that be revealed. I don't think, like, said that way, I don't think anybody wants that. We don't consciously want people to hide their racism so that it comes out sideways. But that's what we tell them to do. That's what we incentivize. That's what the threats enforce. White silence is violence. But also, as a white person, if you don't say the right things, then we're coming after your ass. We're going to remove your job. We're going to cancel you. We're going to wipe out your ability to have an income. Oh, well, then I better make sure that I don't get noticed. And if I do get noticed, I better make sure that what I say is carefully filtered. Right? That's the opposite of the explicit desire, but it's the result, because the condemnation is to the admittance that there was anything corrupt, that there was anything wrong. But here's the thing. The only way that we can sort out this mess is to recognize that there is one, and to give it the opportunity to come out into the light of day. Which means that the very forces that we see throughout the world that are creating all of this pain, all of this difficulty, are in people. So if we want to bring it out into the light of day, we have to welcome it. We can't condemn people for having it. Now, when I say can't, in this case, I'm describing an engineering constraint. Uh, hey, Gordon. Yeah, who are you and who are you becoming? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm describing an engineering constraint. I'm saying we make this shift or we keep going through 2020s. That's a fact. So if you actually want to encourage something other than repeats of 2020 or worse, like 2020 was super lightweight compared to what we could be dealing with. And we're heading there. This is part of what scares me on a global scale. I see us heading to places that are far worse than this last year. A lot worse. So if we want to encourage something different, that's the price. We have to be willing to love unconditionally. That doesn't mean condemn people who don't love unconditionally. That means honestly ask, how can I meet this? So it's actually in that spirit that I wanted to discuss gender identity stuff today. This is a long prelude, but it's an important one because it's part of the context that I want to give for why I'm doing what I'm doing here. I've been hiding. I've been letting that threat scare me. Right? What I have to say isn't exactly in line with any given party. I don't have a whole lot of allies that I can rely will still like me after I say what I have to say. I bet there are plenty, and I think that a lot of these are just internal fears, but they're internalized fears. And I'm recognizing the ways in which I am serving this machine that is hurting everyone, including me, by allowing the fear of what others think or say or do to influence my choice about what needs to come forward. So this is in devotion to truth. I'm bringing my guts into contact with reality so that I can feel it more closely, and so that what I do and say and believe and feel and that the energies in me can be in alignment with real compassion, regardless of what faction of the culture wars that does or does not agree with. So, that context. Yeah, Gordon, let them fail fast. Yeah, I agree. Do I have water? Nope, okay. Okay, so the reason that this became so alive for me today is that I noticed, again, getting kind of triggered about some stuff that landed in my inbox around gender stuff. And the triggeredness is from kind of a funny place. I can tell, like this landed in my inbox, my email inbox, like in the context of here's some beautiful music, and I want to share some context about this music and why I'm sharing it. This is a mailing list I had signed up for. It's and I actually really like the person who runs this stuff. If they happen to see this, I'll let them decide whether they want to step forward. But there's no reason to. Because this is for me, it's not about them. Despite how it might seem. Because I have to get into this a little bit and let the part of me that's offended and frustrated, which has judgments, that part has to come out a bit, and that part makes it sound like it's about other people, but it's not. It's not. It's always about me. So this comes in, and it gives some context about, okay, here's some stuff about rhythm and music and stuff about natal, in like intra-utero, the term isn't coming to mind, but when infants are in the womb, the way that they respond to stuff in really neat ways, like certain kinds of music and speech patterns. And then this person goes into this sort of dream of how, like noticing how much bad there is inflicted upon women in the context of pregnancy. And there is a real epidemiological thing going on here. There's an issue where because pregnancy is such a biological and energy burden, and women always are the ones to bear it. It's just there's this implicit systemic biological thing that shows up that prevents women from being able to engage in economics in a way that can compete with men in a bunch of different situations. this ends up this ends up being a systematic economic oppression to women in a whole bunch of different situations. This is especially true in third world countries. Um, it's less true in developed nations like the United States, but there's still a factor here. Like a woman having a child is, as far as I can tell, like there's a problem with the modern mimetic wars in that all information is crap. Like it's all poisoned. It's hard to tell what's even true, even when you're handed statistics that supposedly come from studies. You have to do a ton of digging to figure out what is saturated um, in rationalization, and is it even true, or was it just fabricated? like, there's a ton of issue in that area. But even just taken at face value, like sorry, not even. There's a thing with in the United States, if a woman has a child, she's much less likely to be able to climb the corporate ladder and become like CEO of a major company and so on, because there's a lot of challenge that's just been added. This has been proposed as one mechanism for the whole glass ceiling or the gap discrepancy between men and women. That it's not actually that women are paid less, but rather that women have, like, women bear a biological brunt that men don't. I don't know enough about the truth of any of those claims to highlight whether that's true or not. That's irrelevant to my point. The point is that this is a narrative about a kind of oppression that women experience by biologically being women. And so this person is highlighting how, like the person who sent the email, was highlighting how there's some sort of dream of freedom from the gender binary, of being able to make it so that babies are grown in basically a lab or a sack or something, so it doesn't have to be carried by the person, and an ability to just level, like not just through that, but through a whole bunch of other things having to do with getting rid of the need for breastfeeding and all of that, so that we can just have actual gender equality by abolishing the foundation upon which gender is built. And this person is describing this like it's a utopia. Like this would create a wonderful world. Now, the kind of reaction that comes up in me about this is horror and rage. I can see some of the things that are, like, I recognize the issue with, okay, there's an actual biological burden placed on women as the ones who can get pregnant. This is like as close to a definition as one might care to get, that if you have sex with a lot of people, is it possible for you to get pregnant? Like this is not an exact definition. I don't claim to resolve the whole like freak out that people have about trying to come up with left brain analytic verbal proper definitions of the exact edges of these gender things. That's part of the psychosis that I hope to get to here. But there's this like I don't mean to dismiss the fact that there is a kind of weight that gets placed, like a literal physical weight, too, that gets placed disproportionately on women. And there's something like, did they sign up for it? Things about free will and consent become very weird when you're talking about how someone is incarnated in the first place. It gets very weird, and that's part of the reason this topic becomes so heated and confused. Although my wish would be that we could look at it and say, this is a very confusing topic. Can we explore the confusion? Rather than screaming at each other and saying and making claims about oppression and destruction of beauty and so on. But in me, one of the energies that comes up in me is this deep rage about, and I have, because I haven't really tried to articulate this, this is going to come out a little bit messy and a little bit scattered. I'm still working on bringing this into, this is the thing that drives me nuts about this. There's some kind of idea like because this is a problem, getting rid of all the symptoms is the solution, so let's just destroy the foundation upon which a huge amount of humanity is built, because we have a better idea in place. And if you oppose the idea, then you are against getting rid of the evil. There's like, no, you don't get to take my cock and balls. They're mine. Fuck you. Right? there's this ferocity that's related to the fact that there is a really basic reality that is, this is more foundational than language. It is more foundational than culture. In the human body, in the blood, in the DNA, that we have survived by having mothers, by having sex in polarity. This is a biological force of reality. It is true. This insanity that claims that gender is just a social construct that's just made up, it's fuzzing the lines enormously. There are things about gender, like the thing about pink versus blue. Yes, that's arbitrary. Absolutely. There are plenty of things that get split across this division that absolutely are cultural, and they don't have the choice of how to split them. Like there was if I remember right, there was a long time where pink was considered to be a very masculine color. Right? I don't know exactly the history behind that, but I could sort of see that. Like if you're wearing a white tunic, who's going to get blood all over their tunic? Right? Like it's generally going to be the men who are going to war. But there's this ground reality that you see throughout the animal kingdom that in terms of a basic biological reality. And right now I want to emphasize, I'm sort of want to pull back for a moment. I'm letting this part speak and come into contact because there's a frustration about, oh, these truths are unspeakable because this isn't respecting the people who don't resonate with the gender binary. There's a rage in me that I have not had room. I have not allowed myself room to dialogue with reality so that my piece and my perception can actually say that part's bullshit and that part absolutely matters and you're completely right. But that part is fucking bullshit and I'm not going to put up with it. The issue is even people who don't identify with the gender binary or feel oppressed by the whole gender thing, I bet that virtually all of them are clearly born as one biological sex or the other. Okay? I know there are odd exceptions, like the XXY chromosome thing that shows up, but these are like the exceptions that prove the rule. Like you have to go looking for people like this. And for the most part, it is not hard to tell who's male and who's female. This is not hard. It can be made a little more difficult. People can twist and alter the social presentation a lot, but there's still a kind of biological reality that we're talking about. It comes right back to this thing of who gets pregnant when you fuck. And so the reason why men are the ones who go to war, why men traditionally are the ones that protect the family, the reason is that men are more expendable than women. For biological reasons. Right? You imagine that your tribe has just had one gender devastated in its population so that you'll only have one of that gender left in your entire population. If you have one man and a lot of women, then in 9 months you can have a lot of babies. 9-ish months. Most guys can't keep it up that long. If you have one woman and a lot of men, then you can have one baby in 9 months. Right? There's a real problem. Right? This is why there are these traditions of women and children first. This is not a matter of oppression or debate. This is a physical fucking fact. Right? So looking at that and noticing, no, look, there is a reason for some of this. There is a reason why men are associated with strength and power. It's not because they just happen to get the upper hand in oppressing women. It's because that's been true for millions of years, since before we could talk. So getting in touch with that as part of the conversation is a really important point here. It is absolutely essential. One of the reasons that it so upsets me, and so upsets me to have these things of, oh, maybe we could just get rid of the biological foundation of gender. You have no idea how much power you are trying to destroy. You have no idea. Sex is not just another pleasurable thing. It's not that it just happens to be correlated with babies. This is not a fucking accident. Lust is the creative force. This is one of the dominant reasons why talking about sex and talking about sexual cultivation and eroticism and desire is so forbidden. Right? There was this recent purge going on in Instagram. Nudity off the table. Supposedly this is because of discouraging human trafficking. But it's discouraging a very particular kind of human trafficking, namely human trafficking that is about sexuality. Why is that driven into the shadows, do you suppose? And then the way that Instagram does this is by, forms that use sexuality in order to sell things. They don't say it this way, but like if it covers women's nipples and it doesn't show genitalia, but it's still suggestive, and it's not for soliciting sex, but it can be for soliciting anything else, that's okay. And women showing breastfeeding, that's okay. Men's nipples, okay. Why? Well, they're not sexual. Why are they not sexual? Because they don't feed babies. But we can't say it that way. I can't really, won't talk about that. It's because it's indecent. It's sexually suggestive. Why are women's nipples sexually suggestive that men's aren't? There's a fucking reason, literally. So there's all of this noise when the real issue is sexuality is dangerous because a culture that owns its sexuality, where individuals are lustful, powerful creatures whose eroticism is engaged with the way that they are living their lives, where they have the capacity to draw their boundaries and engage with others with true, erotic, sexual, dripping, lusty force. They are unsuppressible. That does not make for a very good civilization based on shame. So there is a mimetic evolutionary reason why sexuality and nudity and sex in public, God forbid. Oh, you can't show your children. Like mom and dad can't have sex in front of the children. That's terrible. Why? What's so terrible? Why is that worse than showing all of this fiction of people having their limbs ripped off, or people like getting shot, or of people being tortured? I'm thinking, for instance, of the OA, where they were torturing people to death over and over and over again in confinement in a way that is vastly more emotionally horrific than is watching someone masturbate. Why is it like this? Because it had to be in order to make a population suppressible enough to have a shame-based culture that can allow each individual to be a transmitting vector for toxic viral memes that keep you disconnected from truth. So, what drives me nuts about these visions of let's remove the relevance of uteruses, let's remove the relevance of breasts and of testicles, let's just make humans merely humans. What does it mean when you have humans who don't have any sexual power? I mean, identity, I mean, any of the biological markers that distinguish them? Well, then you have equality, which isn't hot. It's not erotic. So you're ripping out the foundation of human creativity and force and blood and power. in order to have this abstract ideal that someone's left brain came up with, where they clearly can't be embodied enough to feel this power for themselves. I don't mean to claim that the person who sent me the email doesn't feel lust. That isn't what I mean. But there is a kind of degree of how willing to be incarnated as you are you? How willing to experience this flesh, this power, and this challenge are you? Oh, I feel oppressed. Okay, that's the victim pattern, and it's up to you how much you want to deal with it. But if you're willing to face it, the kind of power that you have access to by being the suppressed sex, whatever that is, in whatever situation, there's a force there and there's a reason why it's trying to suppress you. What would happen if you tapped into it instead? So the source of the rage, I want to emphasize, this is still like me giving this room to breathe. There's a lot of fury here, and I'm not being fair because I'm not trying to be. I'm not trying to be polite. I'm trying to be clear. There is something getting alienated that I don't want alienated. I don't want a world that is neutered. I want a world where people have the capacity to own their erotic power as fully as they can. It's like, that is sexy. That is powerful. I want that. That is a world I will protect and I will fight for. So there is a... Now, none of this is to dismiss the problems that show up in gender identity politics, the ways in which, like, oh, you're a woman, you wouldn't understand. That's bullshit. That is bullshit. That evolved from a foundation, and it's related to a bunch of stuff having to do with, well, there's a whole historical arc there. But just like the pink and blue thing, you know, I'm pretty sure women are every bit as capable of understanding things as guys do, even if it turns out that there is some kind of difference between the sexes in terms of how the brains physically prefer to work, as opposed to it being because of how they were raised in a cultural context. Even if there is a really basic biological difference in terms of how the brains work in ways that matter for thinking, I have never encountered any relevant difference between what men and women can or can't understand. Right? So, like, that one, obviously bullshit to me. That's clear bullshit. Right? So, I think it's really important to cut through that kind of bullshit. But I don't think we do it by grabbing the symptom and ripping it off of our bodies. So there's this, yeah. I'm about to cycle, but I see there's some other comments. I see Taylor says, oof, I love this. That was fun. And Daniel adds, of course, since then mimetic evolution has outraced genetic evolution and some of those things have ceased to apply. Yeah, I agree. Some of those things have ceased to apply. However, the foundational hardware is still very closely tied to, like, our sexuality is actually, the only thing more basic than our sexuality is our need to eat. Even our need to breathe is less basic than the drive to fuck. Less foundational, and therefore less interwoven with the rest of our entire biological basis of being. Memes evolved in the context of had to eat. Like, our oldest biological part of our bodies, evolutionarily speaking, the absolute oldest part is the tube from our mouth to our anus. Everything else built around that in order to make sure that that tube could keep being there. Right, that's sort of evolution's picture. Vastly oversimplified because the predecessor of the tube probably didn't look like a complete full tube in any stable way until after sexual evolution appeared. So these two are actually a lot closer together than you might think. Yeah, it's really old and really interwoven, really, really deeply. Right? So now I want to emphasize that the kind of world I would, there's like so many pieces here, and I'm trying to figure out which ones I want to really zoom in on and really emphasize. for me, the center is, why does it drive me so nuts? And I think the answer seems in my head very clear, but there's a way where it's not all the way in my guts. That's part of the reason I want to bring this forward. One reason is it's dangerous, and I want to fight it. The it specifically, the it that drives me nuts is the attempt to neuter the human race as a method of dealing with inequality that seems to be rooted in sexual power. There is something I claim that is tremendously important about owning masculine sexual power and feminine sexual power separately. There is a power binary there. And I will go so far as to say men have an easier time cultivating masculine sexual power, and women have an easier time cultivating feminine sexual power. And this is, it seems kind of bizarre to me that this could be controversial, which is part of the reason why I'm going, well, you know, I have let myself be scared of saying these things clearly, but there's a kind of psychosis, and I want to loop back to that psychosis. That was the thing that I was tracking in the back of my mind. I want to emphasize what's going on with what I see about this psychosis. But actually, let me go there next, but I see there's another comment. Gordon says, the tube was actually a major innovation after millennia of simply having a membrane. Cool. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because before it just would have been a multicellular blob kind of coordinating and then start to specialize in edges. Like, I can see why that would make sense. Oh, reproduction was already well established prior to that innovation? Okay, cool. All right, cool. Well, maybe sex is even more basic. Well, I mean, there are multiple kinds of reproduction. There's the essential copying with mutations that is just from single cellular organisms splitting off and trying to create copies of themselves, but there being mistakes and that being an evolutionary process. Versus when they first started to figure out a system for having two different cells come together and mix DNA in a way that systematically produced more and more viable offspring. That second part I claim is the beginning of sex. And I don't know if that happened. Like, maybe it did, but like, I'm not quite sure about the order of that part of evolution relative to the tube. Part of the reason I'm suggesting that the tube is more basic is actually coming from feeling into the energetics of how the chakra system works, and the way in which the chakra system has more to do with the literal guts and is roughly located at the anus and has to do with raw physical survival and eating, and that is below the part of the body that usually gets associated with play and creativity and sexuality, the second chakra. But this is based on me feeling into it and me seeing loosely how it works with evolution. Daniel adds, this is, of course, a pattern that has emerged via genetic evolution. Many variations exist that would be genetically selected against. Yep, true. Okay, so on psychosis and gender psychosis. I want to emphasize, I don't use the term psychosis as simply a condemnation. It carries more condemnation energy in my system than I would prefer it to. And part of the reason I want to bring it out to air is because I'm carrying this energy in me and I want to sort this out. But when I say psychosis, I actually mean something almost technical. Right? My father is a mental health counselor. He grew up as a psychological, I think I messed up the words there. I grew up with him doing psychological counseling with people, and he spent a fair amount of time in as a counselor in a psychiatric ward, primarily dealing with people with schizophrenia. But when I talk about things as being schizophrenic or being psychotic, I actually mean something that is a lot more precise than how we usually talk about it is, because I mean the thing that our cultural terms derived it from. Psychosis is a state in which the mind produces a kind of world that you end up stumbling through and treating as more real than the world that your body is in. And so this is one way that Dad used to summarize this is saying that neurotics build castles in the sky and psychotics go live there. Psychosis is a dissociation from truth to such a fundamental degree that you can't actually experience the truth. Right? There's some beautiful experiments having to do with the nature of how the left hemisphere works that highlight this. I almost call this gender identity and mother's arm syndrome. This is, I think this is a useful thing to give as an example because this really concretizes it. And I've referred to this as the mother's arm fallacy, but it's not a reasoning fallacy. It's like an existential error. It is a mistake in one's relationship to truth. So there is a type of problem, like a cut in the brain, like an aneurysm, or is the word aneurysm? Anyway, you end up with a lesion in the brain on one side or the other of the hemisphere that will paralyze the opposite arm, because generally the right hemisphere controls the left half of the body and the left hemisphere controls the right half of the body. When that happens on the left hemisphere so that the right arm is paralyzed, you go talk to the person and you say, "Hi, so what's going on?" And say, "Yeah, my right arm is paralyzed." And you ask them, "Cool, can you raise it?" And the person answers, "No, because my arm is paralyzed. I can't lift it. I can lift my other one fine, but not the right arm. Just not going to happen." Sometimes when you talk to people who have this problem on the right hemisphere, and I'm not quite sure how often, like what the proportion is for this. It might be all the time, I'm not quite sure. But when it is a right hemisphere problem that paralyzes the left arm, sometimes you'll go to the person and say, "Hi, so what's going on?" And I think, "Well, nothing." I'm saying, "Oh, okay, that's interesting. So you don't have any problem with your left arm?" "No, no, none at all." "Okay, so can you lift your arms for me?" "Yeah, sure." Or sorry, so they'll do this. Like, "Yeah, sure, here." Like, "Okay, is your left arm up?" "Oh yeah, my left arm's up." "Oh, great." So then you reach down and pick up their left arm and ask, "So what's this?" And they'll look down at it and say, "Oh, that's my mother's arm." Right? I kid you not. Like an actual act, and it's not, that's my mother's arm. Like it's not like that. It's not like they're trying to convince you. It's that they have so convinced themselves of the world that they're in that they literally cannot see their own arm as their arm. That is an example of psychosis. An actual literal disconnection from reality, from truth, at a very foundational level. Okay. So this foundational disconnection. So when I'm referencing this in the context of gender, this is where I really start to get into spaces where I can piss a lot of people off. But there's a truth here. There's a very powerful, important truth. So there's a question about, first off, when someone views sexual identity and gender identity as merely social constructs, right? There's no meat or content to it. Yeah, I happen to, like, one of my favorite, most absurd terms for this is assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth. Yes, assigned by the physical world. Right? There's like a vivid, obvious reality that we're talking about, but this talk of, oh, like male and female are just social constructs that we are assigning to people, and then we raise people in that context, and it's because of, yeah, there's some biological markers, but they don't really matter that much. What really matters is the social imprint of this. Okay, we'll ignore the fact that ovulation is a real force. We'll ignore the fact that having a hard-on is a biological thing. We'll just set that aside. How do you set it aside? Well, that's not my reality. That's my mother's reality. And so, and I want to pull back and emphasize the way that I'm doing this this dismissal and this condemnation of that view is part of the energy that I'm talking about. This is part of what I'm wanting to in myself, that I'm trying to. Right, because being angry at people for having this view doesn't help. It actually hurts. That's part of why I want to bring this into dialogue with reality, because that part I can feel hurts. It hurts me, it hurts other people, and I really don't mean to do that. And getting rid of it requires me to be in contact. So that's what I'm doing here. So I want to emphasize, I think that there is an energy that I am adding that is unnecessary. It is not kind. And I am in the process right now of bringing that into kind dialogue. And that doesn't dilute the truth of what I'm saying a bit. Right? So this business of treating like assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth, and actually not seeing the biological reality. And when having this pressed up, saying, look, there's a thing that we're talking about. Like, yes, what you're fighting for makes sense. What you, like men and women should be treated fairly. There's no reason to like all this misogyny in the culture, the implicit misogyny. That's terrible. Let's please get rid of that. But can we get rid of it not by getting rid of women? Can we do it by instead getting rid of the misogyny? Right? That seems a lot better. Because after all, where did the misogyny come from? Was it really primarily directed at gender in the first place, or was that just a nice outlet for a particular type of pain? And if we get rid of the ability for it to express, is this like a cultural level of emotional post-processing, and the misogyny will instead direct in some other direction? Say, race? Like, right? So there's this disconnect from what the physical issue is, and then when presented, hey, here's the biological reality, getting these incredibly weird responses of, well, but like, how real is that? Like, if you give somebody these other kinds of hormones, then like, did you know that men can lactate? Like, if there's no women around and a baby cries and they keep trying to nurse, after a while men can lactate? That suggests that the whole lactation thing is actually just a gender restriction thing. What if we didn't have this whole gender thing? Maybe men would lactate just as much as women. So then it's not real, blah, 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 blah. It's like, it's insanity. It's that's my mother's arm bullshit. Like, sure, maybe, but what are you talking about? What world are you talking about? It's not this one. So can we please ground in the physical world we're actually in? I'm not saying everyone is clearly a man or a woman. Sure, there are exceptions. And those exceptions aren't less than. Can we talk honestly about the whole picture? The fact that if we actually wiped out the entire existence of men and women, that any problems we had with reproduction in a lab might actually like destroy our species? And I don't mean that just as a threat. I'm pointing out the lack of wisdom that is in trying to replace the biological miracle that is our capacity to have offspring with this left-brained, my ideas work, and because my ideas work, that's the same as them working. In theory, theory and practice are the same, says the left hemisphere. Right? The reason that it matters so much about which side the lesion happens that creates the paralysis is that that's the side that gets debilitated. So when the left hemisphere gets a little more debilitated and you get paralyzation of the right arm, you're still in touch with reality, because that's what the right hemisphere does. It contextualizes everything. Whereas if you lose the capacity to track context, what's intact is the ability to maintain consistency within a model. And the model is there's no problem with my arm. So any evidence that comes in must be compatible with my arm works fine. That's where the problem comes from. So when I'm ragging on this obsession with the left hemispheric models, I actually don't mean to dismiss the left hemisphere, but the left hemisphere is insane when left to its own devices, in a way the right hemisphere is not. The left hemisphere is psychotic. It needs the right in order to ground in reality. So all of this stuff with gender identity becomes even more spicy when you start looking at things like, well, what about people who identify with a gender that is different than the one that they are born into? Like I carry a lot of feminine attributes, and I'm very pleased with them. Like I'm very, very flexible. Like my whole body does this kind of warpy thing, and I have a lot of strength. But I'm much in an important way, I'm faster and more flexible than I am strong. And I really like that. Those tend to be something like more feminine physical attributes. Like the speed is arguably, in some sense, more masculine. But like in terms of, well, strong, sturdy versus fluid and very flexible, there's a definite tendency for that, for the flexibility to go more feminine. And I love having that. There's also things having to do with emotional sensitivity and openness, which, well, why would that be associated with the biological sex thing? You know, I'm actually not entirely sure, but my guess is that um, raising children without that results in so much emotional trauma that the species becomes unviable very quickly. So emotional connectedness becomes super important. Also things having to do with vetting mates, etc. I don't know. I frankly don't know. But I do know that things that are classically considered feminine, there are many of them that I honor quite a lot in myself and I actively cultivate. But at the end of the day, I'm a man. Right? And and this is not just because of the body I have, this is something that I own. It's something I take in. My body is a war machine. It's part of the cultivation of my erotic power as a man to be willing to choose to die to protect what I care about. And that's the strength that I bring to go, oh, I am scared of saying these things in public. Which is not to say that women can't do that, the same way that it's not to say that I can't become more flexible or more emotionally open. But there's something about from what I can tell, the cultivation of erotic power the masculine erotic power that is more readily available to me because I can do, like I can literally stimulate my cock in ways that cultivate a kind of erotic energy in me that serves the capacity to confront and to be willing to risk. And the cultivation of strength. Like these are things that I can cultivate by the literal sexual stimulation of my genitals. But there's a thing that women can do by the stimulation of their genitals that I can't get by stroking my cock. Right? A kind of openness and a processing of trauma. At a capacity to be enormously sensitive and in tune with truth. And what is the truth of how in tune other people are with their hearts. Like women who are really plugged in with their pussies can feel in their pussies the truth or falsehood of how embodied and honest someone is at a heartfelt level. That's not something I seem to be able to do with my cock. I have to develop that through other things that are a lot trickier to track by default. Right? So there's a kind of a hardware foundation that, as far as I can tell, this is at a physical and I think at an energetic level, something that's very powerfully accessible there. Quick tangent. Gordon says, interesting about the hemispheres, context versus theory. Can you point to sources / more info later at your leisure? Yes. In fact, I'll go ahead and reply here so that it's easy for you to find and see. You want to look at the work of Ian McGilchrist. His best-known book is The Master and His Emissary. That is just gold. Wonderful, wonderful academic work there, and it's a pleasure to read. It is kind of thick. I would encourage you to start by looking at some shorter interviews with him. There's a podcast called MetaLearn that had an episode of him in August of 2019 that I think it was about a 40-minute long podcast episode that where he went into the overall arc of it, and I think if you listen to that, you'll know whether you want to read his book. Okay, so in terms of gender identity and gender power, I think that there's a pretty significant issue with, well, what if I, in my heart, I much more strongly resonated with the role of being a woman, but here I am in a man's body. And then I'm stuck with this physical reality. I think this is a lot of what gender dysphoria is. It is the fact that if I identify it as a woman, but I am trapped in a man's body, I can't readily cultivate feminine erotic power by working with the body. I sort of have to bring any attempt to cultivate feminine erotic power into dialogue with a much louder masculine erotic power that my body provides me. And if that's not the energy I want, then I'm trapped, and I would have to do something to the body in order to feel like myself. Okay? This Daniel's saying, I'm utterly unaware of these strange abilities. It sounds supernatural, similar to the idea of one's bones predicting the weather. It seems an extraordinary claim as a result. Yeah, if you experience them, they're not extraordinary claims at all. They're just fact. They're just obvious fact. This is, well, in part, the fact that these things, it's a little bit like if we had a culture that viewed weightlifting as toxic. Okay? And there was this whole attitude of how developing physical strength threatens other people, and it's morally wrong, and that if you have a lot of natural physical strength, then you need to do things to kind of back off and let your body wither down so that we can have an even playing field. It's this level of insane in terms of what we do with sexuality. But if you imagine that we had a culture like that, and somebody went off and said, fuck that, and they start building muscle, one of the things they might come back with is, hey, you know this really bad cold that comes to us about twice a year that wipes everybody out? Well, it gave me a little bit of the sniffles, but I was fine. And your reaction might be, oh, this is like, that sounds like a superpower. Like, how can you possibly just kick off the plague? That's not possible. Right? That sounds like an extraordinary claim. What's your basis for it? Well, my basis is I did weightlifting and I can feel more power in my body. And when I start to get the sniffles, I can feel that power interacting with the cold. Now, the person's experience of that doesn't provide the biological mechanism for how it works. But they don't need it. They can tell it works, both from direct experience and from the energetic level of tracking the fact that having physical strength actually interacts with their experience of the disease. I claim these erotic powers are the same. They aren't mystical powers. They're actually incredibly normal. They're immensely normal. This is part of why we have all of these legends of witches. It's not just that witches are bad influences that summon the devil and the devil does bad stuff. It's that the witches have power. And that's why it was so important to persecute them. I mean, what they're referencing is the enormous power of the erotically cultivated feminine. The erotically cultivated feminine will bring any man to his knees. It wrecks the ego. It absolutely demolishes falsehood. It blasts through bullshit like nothing else. But it doesn't do it with force. It does it through rot. It does it through the wet and the dark. Right? There's this tremendous power that is very terrifying to men who are marching around with their barely lit, tiny little erotic flame of the masculine going, I have a stick, my stick is strong, I'm gonna beat you with it. And if they encounter a real erotic woman, and they feel a degree of lust in them that they've never had to feel before, and they don't have the strength in them to handle that lust, they have to demonize her. Part of the whole power of the masculine is the capacity to feel insanely turned on, insanely lustful, insanely drawn in, to feel that fire burning through the body and mind and go, wow, that turns me on. I'm now going to keep doing what's right anyway. Which might be engaging, but it might not be. Right? These are natural erotic dynamics as experienced by a consciousness in bodies that are made of lust. So if you're curious to explore, I can point you in directions. I realize I got a little bit into defending the perspective. That's an energy I'm going to want to weed out of myself. Because I actually don't want to defend them. The truth doesn't need defending. And it's possible I'm missing something, and I may be exaggerating something. No, I'm not exaggerating anything. I'm really not. That's like my mind running ahead. If you're curious to explore these things, let me know, and I'm happy to point you towards some resources. If you want to be suspicious of them, I hope you have fun with that. So I want to get back to the main thread because I'm hoping to wrap up soonish, and I still feel like I have at least 2 main arcs to hit. I'm halfway through one of them. So there is a so when it comes to the whole bit with gender dysphoria and people who are involved in transsexual rights, trans rights, there's something very real about their experience that I think is super important to track. I think that there is a question that is forbidden to ask. I see Gordon also asking for resources. Sure, I'll touch on that in a moment, but I want to finish this arc first. There is a question type that is forbidden to ask in those communities because it's insensitive, because it's against their official narrative, because these kinds of questions often lead in a direction that sounds like it's dismissing the reality of the experience of people who are trans. Okay? I'm not doing that, but I'm still going to ask the question because it's important, because it's true. The question is, how much of gender dysphoria comes from those people's unwillingness to face the erotic power they have and learn to own it? I'm betting that there is a huge amount, particularly of men receiving this message that it is wrong to be a man, and the only way that you can be acceptable is to alienate your erotic power, become more feminine, be nice, be polite. Yeah, sure, stand up for what's right, but don't be too aggressive about it. Don't be too forceful about it, because force is violent, and masculinity is violent. These are narratives I rarely hear people say, but there's kind of this undercurrent that I can feel. And if you've emasculated enough men across enough generations, they don't know, I haven't known, to stand up against this and say, that's bullshit and I won't have it. Yeah, you can be pissed at me. I don't like the feeling of you being pissed at me. That's fine. I'm still calling bullshit. That masculine capacity. Having a sense that all of that is wrong, I could easily imagine a lot of boys growing up in an environment where that's the message they're getting, and what they want is closeness and intimacy. Traditionally, the way that men, when they've had their emotions shut down, access emotional intimacy is through sex. This is one of the reasons why men are as obsessed with sex in our modern culture as they are. It's because that's an acceptable outlet for somebody who is masculine to be able to access intimacy in a way that doesn't demasculate them. Although I would say that there's a dimension of what even sex is that such men don't have access to, and if they understood that at a visceral level, well, we would have a lot more heroic men in the modern world. And we desperately need that. We really need that. So I could easily see boys growing up in that kind of context, having this experience of, I want intimacy, it's wrong for me to be a man, and I'm becoming a man, and maybe I can do it sexually. Oh no, the sexuality is intrusive, and that's violating. I don't want any of that. I don't want to be that way. And noticing this option of, well, you could, like maybe inside you're a woman. Going, you know, there is the part of me, there's the glimmer in my heart that resonates with feminine essence. And when I lean into that, I don't experience the kind of condemnation that I am used to as a boy with the masculine energy. So when I feel into that, I feel relief. That feels right. Relief is right. And then this gets added to the thought, maybe I am actually a woman in a man's body, or a girl in a boy's body. This seems to me absolutely plausible. It seems to me that there's something similar that's possible in reverse, but it's not going to be quite as intense in quite the same way in American culture. I could imagine something like that appearing in much more misogynistic cultures, much more explicitly misogynistic cultures. Um, I don't know. And my guess, just demographically, that more explicitly misogynistic cultures are also much less tolerant of transsexuality. So such kids might not have an alternative narrative. I don't know. I really don't know. But it seems to me like this is a really important thing for us to approach, because the answer is not to give these kids an opportunity to biologically change their functional sex, to give them hormones and surgery in order to become women. What we actually need to do is help them come into right relation with their own erotic power, so that they can have both masculine and feminine erotic energies actively available in them, in themselves. And when you look at a 6-year-old and you're encouraging the 6-year-old, oh, do you need surgery? Do you need the hormone replacement therapy? This is something that, like, we should support if that's what's truly in your heart. But the 6-year-olds don't have the kind of sophisticated context sorting that's needed to answer that question all the way down. Right? I mean, there's this unfortunate thing that if the answer is truly yes in their deep soul, then it's best done before puberty. Because after puberty, the body has sort of permanently taken on a kind of shape that's really hard to reverse based on whatever the biological sexual stuff is. But like, how many of our children are we literally spaying or neutering in the name of trans rights that takes a specific form that isn't addressing the root pain, which has to do with the alienation of threads of erotic force? That seems like an important question to ask. And the fact that it's forbidden to ask, this is one of the things that's had me stay quiet about these kinds of things. Oh no, that's forbidden to ask. People get upset, but I want my true message to be heard. That's part of my own cowardice, and that's part of what I'm working out here. These questions need to be asked. They need to be asked. We need to face them. And that's not to dismiss the pain of anyone. It's to honor it, to bring compassion to everybody, and to deal with the actual root causes. When we start forbidding questions, we are forbidding the energies from surfacing, that from being seeable, that create all of this pain. Okay, I see there's Gordon saying resources, please. Yeah, I'll get to that. Let me just see. Next one is Daniel Blanc giving a parenthetical comment. My prevailing hypothesis is that the presence of these abilities correlates with amount of libido, and they are virtually unnoticeable in cases of asexuality or proximity to it. I wonder if the counterpart to the witch is the night. Yeah, so this is another place where I may be stepping into kind of... this one is less essential to me. For my impression is that for the most part, the ace community, the asexuality community, is actually just saying, can you please let us be? And can you please recognize that we exist and let us be as we are? And you know what? I love that. I have absolutely no problem with that. That is wonderful. Kudos to you. And to everyone who identifies as asexual, I hope that there's a way that you can be recognized more actively that way. Like, to actually be off the gender binary. Or people who are just, well, that's a different issue. But if there's a sense of, I don't resonate with it, I don't relate to it, I never have, this feels like this weird alien game, and it's just a fact for me, just like, please, let's find a way to help you be recognized in that way. Let's have a culture where we can honor that. That seems really important. It seems like there's another side that's also really important, which is to recognize that sometimes having no libido or no sex drive is actually a biological issue, and that this sometimes seems to relate to the really screwed up sex and gender dynamics that we have on a widespread cultural level. I suspect that some people who might be inclined to identify as asexual as part of the ace community are doing so for reasons that they would actually be happier if they could address something that's going on at an erotic level in terms of their physicality. I don't know what proportion, haven't done any looking, again, this seems like one of those questions that is often strangely unkind to ask. That seems very, frankly, that's wrong. That's just morally wrong, and I'm not going to put up with it. But yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. There we go. Oh, Jack, it's so neat to have you here. This is like this would be so, like, I was actually kind of hoping that we might end up encountering each other. Bunch of thoughts here, but your stories of transness feel pretty off RE boys being denied intimacy, strength being demonized. The thing missing there is A, the historical prevalence of transness, such that a modern societal explanation misses something, and B, trans women face an inordinate amount of violence. It'd be literally shocking to me if someone in their right might believed the grammar there is confusing me. It'd be literally shocking to me if someone in their right might believed that path would be safer, easier. Okay, there's okay, I think I see what the grammar is there. Okay. You mean you would be shocked if anybody found it to be easier to go in that kind of direction. Okay. This is a kind of I challenge you about the absoluteness of your statement. Okay. I also, if once we challenge that and we clean that up, I think I agree with what you're saying. Right. What I'm highlighting is, but the kind of thing that I'm highlighting there has to do with the same kind of thing that causes people who grow up with an alcoholic parent to find it easier to fall in love with people who turn out to be abusive. It's not because they've thought it through and they've sorted out, this is the kind of life that I want and this is how I want to engage with it. It's because that's how their heart knows to orient to that entire domain. I'm talking about the same kind of mechanism here. This is not about someone carefully thinking, what would be the easiest pathway forward? Well, I feel this gender dysphoria, but I think this is the, like, it doesn't, like, that happens after the thing that I'm talking about. After. Okay. Also, I would be insanely shocked if the thing that I talked about never happened. That would be really weird. That would be insanely weird. Right? Now, I don't know about this historical prevalence of transness. I'm just honestly ignorant of that. A modern societal explanation misses something. I don't know what you're talking about there. I don't mean to dismiss the existence of people whose, for all intents and purposes, we're saying that they have souls, and the souls are one sex and they're born as another. I don't mean to dismiss that as a possibility. Right? This is the thing I was saying at the beginning about, I really don't want to, part of the reason I've been hesitant to bring up any of these kinds of things and bring myself forward about them is because I don't, I really don't like having my position shoehorned into something I don't mean and then having to defend myself against attacks against that as dismissals of what I'm saying. I understand that's not quite what you're trying to do here, but the energy here, what I'm trying to do is reveal something about what's going on for me in interacting with this. That's not what I'm saying. I said several times, I'm not trying to dismiss, and there's this kind of frustration, exhaustion, which is part of what I'm trying to clean out of my system because it's not helpful to me or to anybody else. So I'm not trying to dismiss the existence of people who really do fit the type of pattern that trans folk are talking about. I also think that memes are much more powerful than we tend to recognize, especially when they interact with sexuality. Yep. Gordon says, so much truth, need a more succinct presentation of it to share. Yep, I agree. This is not an attempt to create a presentation to nail this topic down. This was me trying to clean house. Also, +1 to Jack. Cool. Sophia, hey, you're saying, I can't watch today and have no idea what you're saying on this video, but thanks for this caption. Cool, then I'll skip this for now then. And Jack says, fair RE absoluteness. Cool. Yeah, and Jack, I also know you in particular to be very balanced and sensible for the most part in exploring these things. And you've also been actively engaged with people and talking about these topics for far longer than I have. I'll also fully admit some of the things that you have stood by and said, no, this is right, have really pissed me off. I'm in a much clearer place than I have been in the past. But yeah, just want to let you know that I appreciate you showing up here and engaging about this. And I would be game for talking more with you about this if that's something that feels attractive to you. I'm doing so from a very different kind of place than I have before. I'm much less interested in convincing and more about dialoguing with truth. But yeah, we'll let that fly however you like. Okay, there was one other thing I wanted to be sure to touch on. Oh, yeah. See, how many hot topics can I stir all at once? Okay, let's see. Jake pops in, so let me see if this is relevant for right now. Okay, making a side note about witches and magic and sexuality. Cool. Some historical note there. Wondering if I'm familiar. Short version is no. Just don't know. Okay, so there's one other thing I want to highlight here, which is it's part of the same story. There's like so recently. Oh, let me see this. I'm looking at time and length. Let me see. Yeah, actually, I think I'll pause the energy there. There is more to say. I'll give kind of a headline for this kind of direction. There's something about what do you think my take is, an orientation is to the whole thing about the way that the trans rights community and J.K. Rowling have been interacting. And the way this is a peak a couple of months ago, but like. Right? This comes up as relevant because every now and then I'll encounter some kind of discussion of like some friends and I talking about, yeah, so how should we divide ourselves into Hogwarts houses? Or how would you, like if you were actually in Hogwarts, what subject would you take? And every now and then somebody will pop in saying, well, subject I would be taking is elves' rights, and put in these things about how Rowling is a problematic TERF, and for those who don't know, TERF is it's an acronym that the trans rights community uses to identify a particular flavor that they've encountered from feminism. It's like a trans exclusionary radical feminist, I think is what the acronym stands for. So, like, there's a whole exciting tangle that's a specific manifestation of. Where like this to me is a significant tension. It's like an instance of the tension that goes on between feminism and trans rights. It's kind of funny that those two could be in conflict. You'd think they would have a lot of overlap because they have to do with dismantling sexual and gender-based oppression. Like if they were trying to actually deal with sexual oppression, we would be getting a lot farther, a lot faster. That would be beautiful. But that's a little too intense for most groups yet. So yeah, so there's a whole tangle there, right? I have opinions, and I imagine I'll bring it in. But given the rest of what I've said and the kind of energy that I'm bringing in, yeah, what do you think my take is? I don't plan on going into a lot of discussion. Just treat this sort of like homework. Okay, so to close out, some of you were asking, well, some of you, Gordon was asking, in case others have questions about this too. Resources for cultivating erotic power in the way that I am talking about. Probably the most efficient resource I could point anybody to is Kim Anami, A-N-A-M-I. She talks explicitly about the importance of cultivating erotic energy and power, and both for the sake of pleasure and having a really awesome time with sexuality, but also as a path to spiritual transformation. And she's very practical and grounded about it. She has a bunch of programs that, frankly, the things that she has to offer are much more diverse for women than they are for men. Um, but like a lot of that, I imagine, is just because there's a something like there. Actually, I don't entirely know, but my initial guess is basically because she's a woman and she knows herself and she knows how to cultivate it. And so there's just more resource for her there. Um, for so she has a sexual mastery for men section for the guys to look at, and you can sign up for her mailing list, and then you'll get access to 3 videos that go over some big points. Um, the main things, the main thing that I would emphasize there, from what I've been able to tell for cultivating male erotic power, some things that I imagine she goes into in her course that's specifically for men, but I don't know because I haven't been through it. Is like the headlines would be cultivate stamina. And this is erotic stamina, which is this isn't like your ability to run, although that can kind of help. What's more important is the capacity to engage with energy while holding still, while holding steady. So that is literally in terms of the ability to have sex for hours, active intercourse without ejaculating and falling over. Like that turns out to be shockingly powerful, shockingly important and key. But it also routes over to, well, what about emotional intensity? If someone freaks out, can you pause and hold and feel without having your core knocked out of place, cultivating that kind of stamina, being with the energy? So that's one major arc. And well, that's like the core theme, is the capacity to do that, to engage with that. And a lot of that, at a physiological level, is build your Kegel muscles, practice masturbating for long periods of time, like definitely no less than 10 minutes, and ideally you build up to 20 or 30. Because it takes something like 40 to 60 minutes of active penetration to be able to give a woman an in the vagina orgasm, which is where the life transformative type of orgasms actually seem to occur, where they originate from. And cultivating physical strength, actually building up the body. Okay, that turns out to be really important for men, to have an ability to engage physically with the world in a way that cultivates physical strength. That seems to be really important. Those are some of the main ones that pop to mind. There's also emotional correlates. At some point, if it seems fitting, I'm happy to share a bunch of this. So like this is stuff that I'm actively working with too. So if you look up stuff about male multiple orgasm, you look up Kiminami, Taoist sexual cultivation practices will also go into this. Unsurprisingly, I know more about the details of the men's stuff than the women's. For the women, you have a lot of resources there with Kiminami. And for people who don't identify as men or women, I'd say look between your legs and pick accordingly. Because what's between your legs matters a lot more than what you identify as in this particular case, because what you're doing is cultivating an energy that is from the body. So that's that. And excluding things like if you're taking hormone therapy or if you've had surgery or whatever, because that's going to mess with it in a way that I just frankly don't know what you do with that. I imagine you can do something, but I don't know what it is. Okay. Yeah, that's all I've got for today. I think that's funny. See how many fires I can set. Yeah. And yeah, Merry Christmas, everybody. Merry Christmas Eve. Thanks for listening.